After more than 130 mass shootings this calendar year, right-wing wacko Charlie Kirk offered a disturbing but honest view of how his side of the aisle should look at the human cost of the Second Amendment. Intrigued? Then click that like and subscribe and enjoy the video. So again, as of today, April 8th, there have been about 130 mass shootings this year, which is much more than the number of days that have actually elapsed this year. The big one, which caught national headlines, was a couple of weeks ago in Nashville, Tennessee, the Covenant School shooting, which killed 6 people, I think 4 kids and 2 adults. And ever since then, you know, for the next couple of weeks, mass shooting will and gun violence will dominate the news, and then it'll fade away until another high-profile mass shooting, and then we'll have this conversation again and again and again, because we're just destined to, thanks to the reticence and abandonment or abdication of responsibility by right-wing government actors. But I do want to talk about a conversation, or an admission rather, that right-wing commentator Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA, he made. And I listened to it, and it was disturbing, but it was actually kind of honest, which is really rare for conservatives, at least in the modern conservative movement, and certainly Republicans. I want you to hear what he has to say about the Second Amendment and the cost, the human cost associated with it.
We must be honest with the population. Having an armed citizenry comes with a price. And that is part of liberty.
Wow.
Driving comes with a price. 50,000 people die on the road every year.
Wow.
That's a price. You get rid of driving, you'd have 50,000 less auto fatalities. But we have decided that the benefit of driving, speed, accessibility, mobility, having products, services, is worth the cost of 50,000 people dying on the road.
Wow.
So we need to be very clear that you're not going to get gun deaths to 0. It will not happen.
Right.
You can significantly reduce them through having more fathers in the home,
Yes.
by having more armed guards in front of schools. We should have an honest and clear reductionist view of gun violence, but we should not have a utopian one. You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry and you won't have a single gun death. That is nonsense. It's drivel. Wow. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year, so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational. Nobody talks like this. They live in a complete alternate universe. So then how do you reduce? Very simple. People say, oh, Charlie, how do you stop school shootings? I don't know. How did we stop shootings at baseball games?
Okay, so the reason I want to play that clip is, I mean, obviously he deflects and he says, listen, it's because there aren't enough dads in the home. And maybe, I imagine there's literature to suggest that because a family environment is typically more stable when you have more than one parenting figure. It's not a knock on single parents. It's just the case that in terms of emotion and finances and all these things, you have extra resources, extra bodies in the home to help provide for the children. Maybe that's true. But of course, he completely skips over the fact that one of the reasons that we don't have as many fathers in the home as we could is because of high incarceration rate in the United States, which is much like its gun violence rate, disproportionately, stupidly, ludicrously high compared to other developed nations. But what I want to draw attention to is the fact that, relatively speaking, Charlie Kirk was honest. He's like, look, he accepts and he acknowledges and he tells other people to acknowledge the right to own guns, the Second Amendment, your right to own guns in this country, and living in a gun-free death society, they're mutually exclusive. You can't have an armed citizenry and have a nation without gun-related deaths. They're mutually exclusive. You can't have them. You have to pick. And he goes masks off. He says, listen, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have gun fatalities, to have the Second Amendment. And I just, even though I fundamentally disagree with so much of what this man says, I appreciate the fact that in a disturbing way, he's just being honest about it. He's like, listen, basically, if you are a Second Amendment enthusiast, you are making the calculation that your right to own guns means more to you, it's more important to you than people not dying of guns. Where he loses me, of course, is where he compares us to driving, for a couple of reasons. I mean, technically on paper, it's true. We accept a certain number of car-related fatalities every year because of the convenience associated with it. But the problem is this. To compare guns and cars is kind of ridiculous. So when people die in car-related accidents, so number one, when we think of gun-related violence, yes, we do count accidents in, but we also count gun homicides, gun murders, deliberate gun violence, and mass shootings. Mass shootings which are not accidental. They are deliberate and purposeful. They are the purposeful utilization of firearms to commit atrocities with a high body count. We really don't have that with cars, right? I'm sure there's some number of car-related accidents which are actually purposeful, where somebody's just deliberately driving into somebody else, but they're relatively few. Car accidents are by and large car accidents, right? They're people who exceed the speed limit, all these things. And when you consider the use that cars get every day, it's such a statistically small amount when it goes into it. Like, we use cars every day to go to the grocery store, to go to the post office, to go to the gym, to go to church, to go to whatever, to go to school. So the amount of use that car accidents get, or excuse me, that cars get, the amount of use, the amount of utility, the amount of convenience, the amount of speed, when you consider all of that, compared to the number of fatalities associated with it, it's very lopsided. But more importantly, the government goes out of its way to do everything in its power to limit the number of car-related fatalities. We have speed limits which are enforced. We have police patrols which enforce the speed limit. We have seatbelt laws in every state, mandatory seatbelt laws. You have to be licensed to drive a car. Your license expires. It has to be renewed. You have to have insurance on your car. Your insurance has to be renewed. You have to register your car. So all these things to basically do everything in our power. And there's also age restrictions on, when and where you can drive. You can lose your driving privileges if you get a DUI. All these things, the government steps in and says, look, we're going to do everything in our power. Like, we give you this privilege of going from A to B, which, by the way, again, the utility of it is beyond, like, you get so much more utility, by far, orders of magnitude more utility from having a vehicle than a gun. A gun can't get you to church. A gun can't move you from A to B. A gun can't, let you pick up your kids. Guns are very, very, very niche. Hunting and killing other things. That's it. So you can use it for food, or you can use it to hurt other things and people. That's it. There is no utility in a gun besides the ability to inflict harm on another person. That's not what cars are for, right? So it's wildly disanalogous and disingenuous for him to compare these things, and he ignores the fact that, again, the government goes out of its way, state, local, and federal government, to heavily restrict and regulate motor vehicles, okay? But the other thing I want to point out is this. So just as a sidebar here, actually, let me play a different clip, okay? And we'll end on a different note. So the other part of Charlie Kirk's argument is that the Second Amendment exists because of an insurrectionist view, which is essentially like, listen, the Founding Fathers created the Second Amendment to allow citizens to basically overthrow the government if they didn't like what the government was doing. And Jamie Raskin, who is one of the finest Congress people in the United States Congress, he's a superb debater. He would eat Charlie Kirk alive. He's a lawyer. He's a constitutional scholar. He's an intellectual in the ways that Charlie Kirk simply is not. He actually debunks this notion and cites his sources. So I'd like you to hear what he has to say.
Now, amazingly, in the wake of this savage insurrectionary attack against our government, the NRA and its followers in Congress continue to propound the idea that the Constitution, specifically the Second Amendment, gives people a right to violently attack and overthrow the government of the United States. This so-called insurrectionary theory of the Second Amendment maintains that its purpose is to allow citizens to wage armed resistance if they think the government is being unfair or unjust. The reading is absurd and flies in the face of the plain text of the Constitution, which in at least 7 different places that I count clearly forbids and punishes armed resistance against the U.S. government. A few examples. The Republican Guarantee Clause, Article 4, Section 4, provides the U.S. shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion and against domestic violence. This was written in the Constitution specifically in response to Shays' rebellion and armed resistance to the government, which the founders strongly condemned. The treason clause, Article 3, Section 3, Clause 1, states treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies. What is violent insurrection against the government if not levying war against the United States? Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says anyone is sworn an oath under the Constitution to defend it and support it, but betrays it by engaging in insurrection shall never be allowed to hold federal or state office again. And one more example, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 says, Congress shall have the power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Now, do our colleagues really believe that the Constitution explicitly and repeatedly gives the government the power to suppress violent insurrections, but the Second Amendment in invisible ink gives the people the right to engage in violent insurrections? This is absurd and outlandish.
Yeah, so there you have it. The fact of the matter is that the notion that the Second Amendment is just this blank check or this unfettered license for armed citizens to overthrow the government is just not true. As he points out, in the Constitution, littered throughout the Constitution, are at least 7 examples of where insurrection is forbidden and is punished by government oversight and government authorities. So it's just not true. The insurrectionary, notion of the Second Amendment is just simply not supported by the Constitution. Now, you may say, okay, you're right. It's not enshrined in the Constitution. The Constitution isn't saying, hey, citizens, if you don't like what the government does, just overthrow them. Haha, that's why you have the right to own guns. But I personally believe that that's the right that the moral right of citizens. If you want to make that case that you think it's a moral, natural right or whatever, at least make that case. But don't tell me that the Second Amendment is a constitutionally enshrined guarantee or offer of citizens to carry firearms for the purpose of overthrowing the government. That's not what it's for, right? If you do that, that would be an illegal, unconstitutional act, right? Just as it was when the colonies overthrew the British Crown. That was not a right given by the British Crown. What we did was illegal. Now, you could make the case that it was a moral right, and I would probably agree, right? But the fact of the matter is that's not what the Second Amendment's purpose is. There's a difference between what you perceive to be a moral, natural right and a constitutional right offered by the Founding Fathers, enshrined in the Constitution. That's not what the Second Amendment is for. The Second Amendment is not for citizens to overthrow the government. Overthrowing the government is prohibited by the Constitution. It's a fact. The other thing I want to point out is there are a lot of people, including sitting members of Congress like Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, people who actually wield state power, are elected representatives, who very stupidly believe that the Second Amendment is an absolute right. That when it says shall not be infringed, what it means is you can own whatever firearm you want, whenever you want, in whatever numbers you want, and whatever scale of destruction you want. It's an unlimited right, and the government can't and shouldn't do anything about it. That has never been the position of judicial scholars or the Supreme Court, which are constitutionally, if we're going to talk about how much we love our Constitution, constitutionally, the United States Supreme Court are the final arbiters of what is and is not constitutional. You may disagree with their verdict. I do all the time. But in terms of constitutional enshrinement, the word of the United States Supreme Court is the final, absolute, highest word, the highest interpretation of constitutional law, until such a time that that interpretation is overturned by another iteration of the court. Having said that, even the most conservative justices on the United States Supreme Court who have ever sat on the Supreme Court, including Antonin Scalia, who wrote the majority opinion in the Heller case in 2008, which really supported, it's the case that people often cite when talking about how much they love their constitutional Second Amendment right, even he acknowledges the Second Amendment is not an unlimited right. Like most rights, the Second Amendment right is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. For example, concealed weapons prohibitions have been upheld under the amendment or state analogs. The court's opinion should not be taken to cast doubt on longstanding prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms. The Second Amendment is not and has never been, even in its most ridiculously stretched interpretation, it's never been an absolute or unlimited right. The United States government, state, local, and federal government have a right, have a vested interest and the authority and the right to constrain and conditionalize your right to own firearms. We have the right to take them away from felons. We have the right to say you can't bring your guns in here, here, and here, and here, and here. We have the right to say you can't conceal the firearms you do have. We have the right to say you can't own a tank. You can't own a nuke. You can't own a machine gun. We have the right to say that. The government has the right to say that. So anyway, I just, as in the broad context, again, Charlie Kirk offers a masks off moment. He says, look, there is a human cost to this. The right to carry arms and the right of children to be fear-free of, going to school and not getting shot up, they're mutually exclusive, and you have to pick one at the end of the day. And Charlie Kirk, like a lot of right-wingers, sides with the Second Amendment. It is a higher priority for him. It's more important for him to have, unfettered access to guns than it is to meaningfully protect children from harm. And I just appreciate the fact that he's honest about it. To him, he establishes the fact that these are mutually exclusive, and he lets you know what side he's on. But a lot of his analogies, comparing it to cars, doesn't withstand scrutiny, or vehicles doesn't withstand scrutiny. And the insurrectionist, principle of the Second Amendment, this idea that the Second Amendment is just, hey, listen, you have the right to overthrow the government. That's what the Second Amendment's for. It's just not the case. It's been debunked very thoroughly by constitutional scholars. So, food for thought. Hey, you! Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, and I hope that you did, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. And if you absolutely hated the video, the best revenge for you is also to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. That'll teach me. If you want to share an opinion or share some feedback, go ahead and leave a comment, all right? 2023 is a year of change, hence the aggressive rebrand and commitment to new content. Inspired by my friends Luke Beasley and STV Philly, my personal goal for this channel is to hit 40,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So I'm hoping you'll do me a solid by spreading the word and the videos to potential fans and hate watchers alike. And in the meantime, we'll be pondering politics again with you very soon.